Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of the Fathers. Live from Israel with Rabbi Chaim Coffman. He's been going at this hard and heavy now for, well more than a year. And we're still on Chapter 2, Mishnah 6, Part 12 today. That means he's got what to say. Either he believes we need to hear it, or he's fully aware of the depth of the Mishnah, and he just wants to make sure there's no misunderstanding. Whatever the case is, it's always a joy to be with him and hear his learned position on the ethics of the fathers. It's just beautiful material. And for those of you that may have missed it, I mean, our Roku channel will be launching. The International Noahide Network will be launching this week, Thursday night at midnight, which is technically Friday morning. And we'll be starting Pirkei Avos all the way back to the Blue Bunny room with back to the beginning. So we're going to be playing that, and I'm going to make sure that Rabbi Coffman gets a lot of airtime with the Pirkei Avos lessons, and I'm trying to make sure they're all up there in order and sequence. And if you ever want to go through it, I'll try and make it available as a video on demand block where you can actually go and see the series from beginning to end. If you're a binge watcher and you want, let's face it, he's going to end up with probably a week or more straight, nonstop, 24/7 material if I had it running front to back. And he's still going, so we do appreciate. So let's not delay and let's just jump right in to see what the rabbi's got to share with us. Rabbi Coffman, you're live on the air. It's your class. Take it away, sir. I'm going to try and mute myself and let you do what you do best.
It's a pleasure to be here, as always. And even before the Roku channel is up, you can go to my YouTube channel at Rabbi Chaim Coffman. There's a playlist for Pirkei Avos. They're all there, right? More than 70 episodes, I think 75 episodes, something like that. Gonna catch up. You're gonna catch up soon enough to Tanakh Talk. We already hit 100, right? 101 over the last couple of years, and William Hall was very happy because I got him a bottle of scotch after all this time. After all this time, because I did tell him if he ever got me more than 40 people live, I buy him a bottle of scotch, and and that was it. So we hit more than 40 people live a bunch of times, and whatever. It took a long time to get him the bottle of scotch, but he was extremely happy. In any case, even before the Roku channel goes on, I got all the classes there. They're out of order because you have to start from the most recent to the most past. They have to screen down, and all the ones Pirkei Avos, and then start from the beginning. So you can see by the date, right? Once you click it on, you can see by the date what started. And right, we did start as the Energizer Bunny, but we sort of upgraded. We upgraded a little bit.
Now we're going boldly where no man has gone before.
Yeah, exactly. Going nowhere when, and if you can read this little print, you don't need glasses, right? Obviously a reference to Spaceballs way back when. Any case, we digress. We want to get right into Pirkei Avos. We are in chapter 2, the 6th Mishnah, part 12. There probably will be a part 13. It just won't be next week because next week is the fast of the 9th of Av, which starts after Shabbos. So we're not going to broadcast next week. But in any case, we were speaking about how someone bashful cannot learn, right? And a person who's bashful is not going to ask questions. If they're not going to ask questions, what's going to happen? They're not going to know what to do because they're too embarrassed. And as we mentioned, the person they're learning from has to have a lot of patience, right? That's the next part of the Mishnah. Right, and a patient person cannot. We're going to go through. We're going to go through more of that as well. But someone who's bashful can't ask the question, right? They're never going to ask the question. So if a person's a former Christian or whatever, coming out of paganism, they know not to ask questions. Why? Because they don't have answers, right? By Judaism, it's all about asking questions. Anyone who's ever seen any parts of the Talmud back and forth, questions, answers. And some of the rabbis got very, a little bit testing when someone said something either was out of line or was totally off base, etc. Because they're searching for truth, right? They're absolutely searching for truth. Doesn't mean can't ask the question if it's a bad question or it's an invalid question. Fine, the person has to be dealt with in the proper way, right? But if someone who's bashful will never ask the question. And if you don't ask the question, well, second best is you go to Rabbi Dr. Google, right? And not everything is on Rabbi Dr. Google either, right? So you have to get the guts up in order to ask the question, because if you don't ask the question, you won't get there, right? So the next part of the Mishnah, as we started with last week, is someone who's impatient cannot teach. Now, a teacher, when somebody teaches, we mentioned that they have to be careful. They have to certainly be careful giving over material, because they want to make sure that the student understands what they're teaching. Now, someone who's teaching is not going to give them everything on a platter. He's going to give them things, also to think about, right? But at the end of the day, when someone's teaching, there's no point, as we mentioned, there's no point to teach if no one's going to understand what you're teaching.
Right.
There are some people out there who want to show how much they know, how deep their knowledge is, what they know in Kabbalah. Well, that's great. But if you're teaching people that don't understand a single word you're talking about, then what's the point of teaching? That has no value.
Right.
It just a person wants to show off. They want to show off their knowledge. But if someone doesn't understand and they're going to make mistakes, right? Certainly that's not what the point here is. Now, even if a student seems to ask a question that may seem heretical, right? Now, we have to understand where the question is coming from. The teacher has to get to the bottom why the student is asking the question.
Right.
Could be the student's got difficulties, grasping a certain concept, or they want clarity. Now, what if the teacher, or many teachers say the same thing? They say you shouldn't be asking this question, or I'll deal with it later, but it never gets dealt with. So what happens? The student thinks Judaism doesn't have answers. Now, just because a student will ask a question, why is there suffering in the world? They ask serious questions, not because they just want to waste time. Not because they want to seem like a difficult student.
Lots of questions.
They have a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Why these things happen? Why do we get tested? Right? Why do the righteous seem to suffer? Right? There are a lot of basic questions that are serious questions that should be dealt with. Now, if a teacher thinks the student's asking in a heretical way, so then you get a problem, right?
Sure.
Because you don't want other students getting caught up in all this and also leading to heresy.
Right.
But it's like anything else. You have to get to the bottom line what the question is. If someone, we mentioned, last week, we mentioned a number of times, right? I'll just recapitulate here. And that is, if someone's asking a question because they have an agenda.
Right. It's not really a question.
If someone's asking a question, they say, hey, isn't circumcision barbaric? You say, no, barbarians don't do it. Because they're not asking a question. They have an agenda.
Yeah,
you got feminists, right? Giving a class to a bunch of women. And a person says, the rabbi get up there and say, okay, are there any differences between men and women? Right? In order to show differences in Judaism, right? Spiritual differences. And these feminists will say, no, there's no difference between men and women. So you ask the question again. There are any differences? Anything you can think of, any differences between men and women? I got one. Women can have children. Men can't. Right? And it'd be up to men. There wouldn't be any kids in the world. But you have to see if it's an agenda. Right? Doesn't matter what you say. They're not interested because you can't answer an answer. Just like in the Haggadah, we mentioned that there's a wise son, a wicked son. Right? A son who doesn't know how to ask, and a simple son. So the wise son and the evil son, they both ask similar questions. The wise son, you give an answer. The evil son, you blunt his teeth. And you say, had you been in Egypt at that time, you wouldn't have come out. Right? So the commentators ask, so why don't you give an answer? Why do you just blunt his teeth? Why don't you try and draw him closer? Isn't there a big idea to draw Jews closer to their religion? True. Problem is, this person didn't ask a question. His question was more based on an agenda. And therefore, if it's based on an agenda, you don't give them an answer. Why? Because whatever you're going to say, they're going to laugh. They're going to make fun, right? You can't answer an answer. Similar thing by Rabbi Chaim Brisker, of blessed memory, more than 200 years ago. He had a student that went sour, and he asked the students, years later, he asked them, like, what happened? So the student said, I had questions. I had a whole bunch of questions. So Rabbi Chaim said, let me ask you, did you have questions while you were in yeshiva? Or you had questions after? He said, no, I had questions after. So Rabbi Chaim said, I can't answer an answer. That's not a question. That's an agenda, right? So someone, when they throw out these type of things and they make statements and they're not asking questions, I don't have, or anybody does not have to give an answer. They say, doesn't Judaism, I think Judaism discriminates against women. What's the answer? Oh, I think Judaism, discriminates against pigs. What's the answer?
It's a statement.
Oh, so they keep asking a similar question. Finally, they get fed up. They say, why do you keep saying, oh? It's because you didn't ask me a question. Right. All you said, you made a statement. Yeah. I don't have an obligation to answer a statement. Right. So they come back and say, if I were to ask you that I think that Judaism discriminates against women, I would ask your opinion on it, then what would you say? That's a question. Right. But when a person makes a statement, and they may make a nasty statement or whatever, it's an agenda. If it's an agenda, what's my answer? My answer is, oh, I don't have an obligation to answer.
Yeah.
Right. We get caught up, when people ask us things, someone may ask, where was God during the Holocaust? Right. So the answer is, well, it's where he always is. What's the question? No. Why did God kill 6 million people? He didn't kill 6 million people. A lot of people killed 6 million people. You have the Germans, the Latvians, the Croatians, the Lithuanians, the Russians, right? A lot of people, right? So that wasn't the question. The question is, well, where was man at the time? But I got a great book. It's called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. You want to read it? No, it's just a question I ask rabbis to make them fidget. Okay, next. Like, that's an agenda question. An agenda question, I don't have an obligation to answer. And if they say, well, you don't have an answer, you can ask me a question. Right? If someone doesn't ask you a question, you don't have an obligation to answer. The problem is we're already 5 steps beyond what they said. We're going to answer like this. We're going to answer like that. We're going to answer the other thing. But they didn't ask a question. They didn't ask you a question. They made a statement. So when you make a statement, when someone makes a statement, my obligation is, okay, so you made a statement. So what? What does that have to do with me? That's not a question.
Exactly.
Right. But if a person thinks, and this is very crucial, certainly in school, and that is that if someone has a question, you don't blow them off.
Exactly.
Right. You don't say, okay, well, we'll deal with it another time. We got too much ground to cover, whatever. And if they never deal with it, what does the student feel? There are no answers.
Yeah, they feel jaded. You cannot make somebody feel, first of all, that they're getting blown off. And second of all, even more important, that there are no answers. Because the student will ask another question and get the same response. Yeah, Rabbi, this week in my Book of Job class, I had somebody get on there, and I posted rules for coming into the Zoom room prior, that I don't want to let any anonymous trolls in. Well, somebody came on there, and they had a normal name, so I thought, okay, I'll let the person in. And they weren't, because I want to reach out and I want to be able to answer a question if there's legitimate questions. But I let the person on. They started playing, Nazi music and started to threaten. I was going into the gas chamber and all this stuff, and I had to literally give them DOS boot real quick. It's like shame when stuff like that disrupts a class, right?
No, that's 100% true. I mean, there could be, I've seen on some of the chats, my Tanakh Talk videos where, there are trolls there. There are some trolls there, which...
Yeah, we've been good of the last 6 months or so.
We're not going to recognize them. They're not going to ask, if they're not going to ask legitimate questions, or they're just going to sit there and, yell and scream and, whatever. That doesn't do anything because they got nothing better to do. Right? They got nothing better to say, oh, I think I'm right. I think this, I think that. You should address it. They're not interested in being addressed. They're interested in just trashing you. If they're interested in trashing you, well, I got better things to do in my time. I could watch the hair I don't have in my head grow, right? But if someone, again, if someone's going to ask questions, and really the questions are not questions, we don't have any moral obligation whatsoever to answer them. None. Not because we don't think there's an answer, right? Not because we don't just want to deal with it and blow them off, but we know and we understand from the question they have an agenda. When somebody has an agenda, you don't answer them. You don't answer them unless they ask a question. If you want to, you can, right? It's basically a waste of time because you're talking at them. Right. You're not talking to them because they're not going to listen in either case. Now, another reason
there's wisdom there, yeah, for sure.
Impatient cannot teach over here is because the person is impatient. And when the question comes out, let's say, where the question's going to come within 5 seconds, and you start cutting the person down, they're not going to ask questions anymore. They're going to be afraid to ask questions. Why? Because you cut them down. Now, if it's a question, let's say Mr. JC, Talmud says, didn't ask his Rebbe this question, Rabbi Shua ben Prachia, some old, that was his Rebbe. He made a lewd comment when they were at an inn, right? He made a disgusting comment, and it's a very bad example, but it wasn't really a question, right? It wasn't a question. He made a comment, and what did Rabbi Shua ben Prachia do? He threw him out. He threw him out because he made a disgusting comment. So he comes back sometime later, asks for forgiveness, he throws him out. He comes back a second time, asks for forgiveness, he throws him out. Third time he comes back to ask for forgiveness, Rabbi Shua ben Prachia is in the middle of saying the Shema. He can't answer. But he would have accepted his forgiveness. Since he asked the question, didn't get an answer, he went off and did what he did. Right now, at some level, Rabbi Shua ben Prachia is taken for task here. He's taken the task because, right, as it's brought down, as the Talmud says, you should, push away with the left, bring closer with the right, or vice versa. I might get it reversed. Right? It's one way or the other. Either you bring close with the right, push away with the left, or you bring close with the left and push away with the right. Right? It's one of the two. I don't remember exactly which order it is. But the point is,
what does that imply, Rabbi?
The point is he's taking the task. He's taking the task. I have to understand, we mentioned last week, right, that Rabbi Shua ben Prachia had a student, took him 400 times to explain to him certain things. Right? In other words, when he asked the question, he had to repeat it 400 times. So he had an unbelievable amount of patience. Right? So what happened over here? It's the same Yeshua ben Prachia, Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia. So what happened? With JC? The difference is, when someone asks the question, you have an obligation to answer them to the best of your ability. Doesn't matter how many times. You explain it this way, explain it that way, explain it the other way. Sometimes we don't have patience, right? A person may not have patience because, you explained it one way and they don't get it. So you explain it again that way. They don't get it. So you explain it a different way, right? You try and show a different way. And if they don't get it, you get frustrated. Now, the person, let's say is not mentally challenged, but you get frustrated because if they ask the question, the same question, you answered it 2-3 different ways.
And they don't want to hear it.
Over 10 minutes, 15 minutes, the person, the teacher himself is exasperated. So I don't understand. I answered the question. Now, if it comes up something where they're not willing to accept, right, now that's a different issue, right? Someone asks the question and they say, if you listen to the rabbis in oral law, you're adding or subtracting to the Torah, right? You're not allowed to add or subtract to the Torah, says Moshe Rabbeinu. True, right? It's coming up in the book of Deuteronomy. We're starting a new book of Deuteronomy next Shabbos, right? But, it comes up, so they'll say, you're not allowed to add or subtract. So the rabbis are making a fence around the Torah. The Torah says you have to listen to the Kohanim, to the priests, in every generation, the priests of the rabbis. If they make a fence around the Torah, that means that they don't want you to transgress something more severe. If that is the case, what does that mean? That's not adding or subtracting, right? In other words, if they're telling you, I want you to add to the mitzvah of tzitzis. I want you to add another thing of tzitzis. I want you to add another compartment, in tefillin, right, where you're going to put more parchment or whatever. That's forbidden because you're adding on to the mitzvah. If they're telling you what the mitzvah means, if they're telling you what it means, to sit in a sukkah, because the Torah tells me you have an obligation 7 days to sit in the sukkah, Torah doesn't give me dimensions. Torah doesn't tell me what it's made of. Torah doesn't tell me if it's got a roof or roof, depending where you're from. Doesn't tell me any of these things. I have no detail. If I have no detail, where am I going to get the detail from? Oh, they're adding to the Torah. Now, if they kept coming back, right, as some of these trolls will, and they keep coming back saying the same thing, then you have to move on, right? Because they're not willing to accept the answer. If you see they're not willing to accept the answer, and they blaspheme against, the rabbi's this, the rabbi's that, then there's no one home to talk to, right? You have to be talking in the same realm. If you're not talking in the same realm, and they're not willing to listen to any of your information, then there's no point, right? I remember, many years ago, someone had said something. I said, oh yeah, the Torah, the Bible says like this, and they answered, they said, well, who says the Bible's right? Who says the Bible's true? Who says I have to listen to the Bible? Now, I could have gotten a whole conversation, right? I didn't necessarily have all the knowledge. I could have gotten a conversation, but I know there was no one to talk to. If I start bringing proofs, they're not interested. First of all, they're never going to change their life anyway, but they're not interested in the question. They have no interest. Zero. So what are you wasting your time for? Maybe you'll make them feel guilty. Maybe someday they'll want to look into things. I'll tell you the following story. There's a great rabbi known as the author of Kelm. The author of Kelm had many, many students. The author of Kelm had a student that went sour. He had a student that went off. And he found the student, and they had a discussion for a couple hours. And what happened? It was a stalemate. Right? The student didn't gain any ground. The author of Kelm didn't gain any ground. So the student to the author of Kelm said, why you waste your time over here? Why are you wasting your time with this guy? 2 hours. You know how much you could have learned in 2 hours? How many character traits you could have tried to fix up? Why are you wasting your time? This blockhead. Reminds me of Charlie Brown. This blockhead, right? This blockhead, you're not going to get anywhere. Totally not going to get anywhere. So why are you wasting your time? So the author of Kelm said, it wasn't a waste of time. Why? Because the more I gave in, the more I gave over to the students, so even if he stays at the same level, and he stays that he's not going to go on the straight and narrow path, and he's not going to keep Torah and mitzvahs, you know what? He's not going to get the same benefit from doing the transgressions. Because I leveled into him so much, he'll have some level of guilt that might turn him around. That eventually might get him to think. Rabbi, yeah. That eventually might bring him to the promised land, so to speak, in order to get out of his funk of doing terrible things. It may not. 100% it may not. Right? But at the same time, the enjoyment that he's going to have by doing the transgressions is going to be less.
That's right.
It's going to be a heck of a lot less for one very simple reason, because I hammered him over the head. Right? Now, does that mean 100% he's going to come back? Doesn't mean that. Right? But at the same time, what does he understand? He understands what his true purpose in life is. Even if he doesn't choose it, he's not going to feel good about himself while he's doing what he's doing. That in and of itself could bring him back to repentance. Guarantee? It's not a guarantee, but it wasn't a waste of time. Right? It certainly wasn't a waste of time. So we have to see people we come in contact with. Why they're asking a question. What is behind the question? And we have to be sensitive enough to hear it out. Right? We don't have to have, 120 IQ over here. You have to see and get a feel for what they're asking. The question about the Holocaust and people suffering, it may come out, they had relatives that suffered and died. Right? Then why did my grandfather suffer and go through X? Or why did this one, I had a loved one and they went through that, or whatever it is. Right? So that may be the question. They're just throwing it up in the balance of another, of a bigger question. You have to strip away the layers, so to speak, in order to pinpoint exactly what the question is. So now, once I understand the question, that's a whole different ballgame, right? Once I understand where they're coming from, then a person can give an appropriate answer. But if you start answering the question before you realize what they're asking, then the answer is not going to be fit for what the question is, right? So therefore over here, a teacher as well, if someone asks the question, the teacher himself, even if they think it's a foolish question, and if they don't have it on video, if they're not asking in person, it's over the phone, so they can't see your reaction. But obviously, if you're doing something live like this, someone asks a stupid question, or you think it's a stupid question, you can't give a sour face, right? You can't give over an expression or say things to show that the student is asking a foolish question. Even if you think it's a foolish question. Why? Very simple, because if you do that, first of all, you may embarrass them in public, right? Embarrassing them in public, you're basically murdering them, right? That's a problem. That's a huge problem in and of itself. But even if that's not the case, if a person is not embarrassed, they're still never going to ask a question, right? Because they think they have a good question, or maybe somewhat of a serious question, and the teacher himself or herself gives a frown to the question, and it's a legitimate question. What are they going to say? Oh, I shouldn't have asked the question. How foolish was I to ask the question? And then they're never going to ask the question, right? So we have to see why they're asking the question. We have to make sure things are squeaky clean, that they shouldn't have questions. And if they do have questions, we have to answer them, right? We have an obligation to answer them. So anyone who puts anything, and I mean anything, out on social media, and people misinterpret it because you didn't make it clear, right? You're going to pay a serious price, right? You're pretty much distorting Torah over here. But at the same time, person can say, well, if they misunderstood it and they twisted it into a pretzel, it's not my fault. Now, part of that statement is true, right? In other words, if they misconstrue something, you didn't say it, you made it absolutely clear, that's not your fault. But if they misconstrue something based on what you said, then basically you are misleading, you are misinterpreting, you are allowing people to make the wrong conclusion. And by doing so, you're going to be liable, right? We mentioned last week this case, if someone put up a post, and a lot of people, myself included, thought the person was saying you're not allowed to charge to teach Torah, right? We spoke about that, and I made clear this person understood that whatever you put up, you make sure no one's going to interpret it in the wrong way, right? Even if a person doesn't like what you have to say, but you say it black and white, right? There's no room to move. There's no room to move to the left, no room to move to the right. What you said is black and white. That's it. So if they say, I don't like this, and I think this, and I think that, that has nothing to do with what you said. They can say whatever they want. That's not saying that they're misconstruing what you're saying. They just disagree. They disagree, and they're going on their own thing. But it doesn't mean what you said isn't true. It doesn't mean you misled people. Certainly doesn't mean that, right? Yeah. So a person,
I can testify.
Nonetheless, one second, a person, nonetheless, you have to be squeaky clean. You have to make sure that whatever you say, A, is backed up, and B, if you're not sure, you have to say 100%, I'm not sure. This is what I think based on this. But if a person says, they're pretty confident this is the way it is, and they're actually wrong, okay, they have to admit. They have to admit that they're wrong. At the same time, they have to make things, possibly, as clear as possible. Somebody a while ago, this is I don't know, it's not a convert. It might be a Jew in training, maybe a non-Jew in training, right? But, or let's say a Jew in training for that matter. Whatever it is, person Person makes a video. Right now, I'll tell you what the problem with this video is, and the problem with this in general. Person makes a video, and he doesn't have requisite knowledge. And you can tell he doesn't have requisite knowledge because every Hebrew word he butchers. He doesn't pronounce right. Right? That's a major red flag right there. But not only that, he quoted something from Shulchan Aruch, from the Code of Jewish Law. And he said, this is what the Shulchan Aruch says, and this is what the halacha is. Now, if you've ever lived in a Jewish community, what he said is absolutely false. How do I know it's false? Because the quote was that even single women, right? The Shulchan Aruch says even if you're a single woman, you have an obligation to cover your hair. Married women, there's nothing to talk about, right? They have an obligation to cover their hair, right? Comes along the Code of Jewish Law and says a single woman has to cover her hair. Now, without looking at what the commentaries over there say, right, what would be my first thing I would say? You know, in any community I've ever been in, any ultra-Orthodox community, right, what have we seen? Single women do not cover their hair. Anywhere. Not by Sephardim, not by Ashkenazim. There might be some here and there, right? The vast majority, 99%, do not cover their hair if they're not married. Period. Nothing to talk about. Now, without getting into the details of the halacha here, the point is this person made a statement, made a blanket statement. Okay, I can also read the Shulchan Aruch. I can also understand the translation. I don't need an English translation because I know how to learn, right? So, okay, now what does it mean? But, if you're going to quote something, first of all, understand what you're quoting. Don't just make a blanket statement. First of all, you can't pronounce the Hebrew, you idiot. Second of all, I can also read the Hebrew, but that's not what the halacha is. Now, I'm not saying just because you'll say, well, the Shulchan Aruch said it. You're right. But there are things that we don't go according to that because the commentaries say, what's the case talking about? It's not talking about a black and white case, that all single women cover their hair. You know why I know it's not? Because you don't see it in the Jewish community. Right? So if the person would have done any research, which he didn't, if he would have done any research, he would have realized that's not what the halacha is. But since he can't learn a lick, since he's wasted his time making these stupid videos and trashing people who probably deserve to be trashed anyway, right? Certain rabbis, he's going to do that as well. Why in the world are you making a video if you can't read Hebrew properly? And why are you making a video about Jewish law if you don't know Jewish law? Why are you wasting your time? You should be learning, right? But if you're going to make a video, give classes or whatever, on Jewish law, you better darn well know what you're talking about. Oh, yeah. And if you don't know what you're talking about, keep your big mouth shut.
That's right. Repercussions
right? But
could
again,
be terrible.
Anybody who knows anything in learning would have seen that and they just would have laughed like I did. I laughed my head off. I mean, I did a Q&A on this. But I laughed. Why'd I laugh my head off? First of all, he mispronounced every Hebrew word he said. Second of all, he gave over a halacha that's not true. It's not true because the person obviously never lived in a Jewish community. Because if he would have lived in a Jewish community, he would have known single women don't cover their hair. But the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch says single women cover their hair. So now the commentaries say, what's the case? What's the case going on? You have to know. You have to know what he's talking about, right? You can't just quote it and say, see, all single women have to cover their hair. But we don't see that. We don't see that in normative practice. If you don't see it in normative practice, then, okay, you can quote it, but you have to qualify it. You have to clarify it. Someone brought it to my attention and asked me if this is really true, right? So, so I watched part of this video. I looked it up, very easy to look up. And I said, I told this person it can't be true because this is not what goes on. I said, I'll see what the case is, but what he's saying is absolutely false, right? So my question would be, okay, you're starting out learning. You want to show you know something, sit and learn, right? Before you go out there and teach, or you want to teach, right, you have to have, I would say, a requisite level of knowledge. Now, in the world of outreach, people would disagree. If you know something, you could be able to give over to others. Now, that may be true. That very well may be true, right? Rabbi Yaron Ruvain talks about his rabbis telling him that. once he became religious, he said, give over whatever you know to others. Okay? Right? But there's a danger in that. The danger is, you may be, quote unquote, now a spokesman for Torah. But if you don't have requisite knowledge, someone could turn you into a pretzel very easily. Right? If someone can turn you into a pretzel very easily, and your answer's going to be good, well, it's a good question, I don't know. So what are you going to have to do? You're going to say, let me get back to you, which is true, which is what a person should do. Right? They should say, listen, I'm not the world's greatest, expert. I'll get back to you. I'm not sure. I don't have an answer at the moment. But if you're going to give something over, you have to know it like the back of your hand, right? Or you should know it like the back of your hand. And if someone asks you a question you can't answer, okay. Someone starting out, there's one, I learned from Mori Rebbe, Arav Agon, Moshe Sternbuch Shlita, should be well. One of the Torah giants throwing this generation. I had the merit to see him last week, still looking pretty holy at the age of 94. Unbelievable. And he told me many years ago, when I wanted to go out and do outreach when I was like 25, 26, with a few little kids. And he said, if you have no problem making a living, and that time I had money, he said, if you have no problem making a living and you have the opportunity to learn for however many years, he basically said in my language,
don't pass it up.
You got to be off your cotton picking head. What are you doing going to go out and teach? He said, I promise you, you may be successful now, but he said, imagine how much knowledge you'll have under your belt, how much more powerful you will be when you go out later. He goes, I give you the blessing. I give you the blessing. You want to go out and teach later? You go out like absolute fire. Like the Energizer Bunny. He says, you go out there. He said, but don't do it now. He said, you're going to shortchange yourself now. So I use chutzpah. And I said, okay, you just, I didn't really know his stature at the time. This is more than 30 years. This is about, I've known him for 30 years. Right? So I didn't know, 25 years. So I didn't know his stature at the time. So I said, listen, you just broke my dream in like 35 seconds. And I said, if you're going to break my dream and I'm actually going to listen, you're going to be the one that's going to teach me. And what was his answer? His answer was blined. He said, without a vow, right? He says, no problem. So I kept hocking him. What are we going to learn? We're going to learn. And finally he told me, he said, listen, I don't even learn my grandkids. I don't even have time to learn my grandkids. So what was my answer? My answer was because grandkids aren't pushy enough. So I said, I'm not taking no for an answer. And so he said, okay, come to my house, 8 o'clock, Monday night. And I started learning with him one-on-one. So one of his sons told me, he said, I've never, ever, ever seen my father do this with anyone. So I said, good, brush up on your English, sit down, you learn something. That's how I developed my connection, right? But, he didn't tell me when I was 35, and I was looking for a job and I had I had a great resume. No one wanted to hire me. He didn't tell me it was going to be hard to find a position out there. Doesn't matter, right? But the point is, he was 100% right. Now, not everyone has the opportunity to be able to sit and learn, indefinitely. Obviously, you're not making that much money sitting and learning, et cetera. So, you got to do something, eventually to make money. But at the same time, some people go out way too early, and they shortchange their learning. Doesn't mean they're not successful, right? Certainly doesn't mean that. That's a knock against Chabad, right? They send their guys out relatively young. Eshet Torah does a similar thing. They make someone religious 3-4 years later. They send them out somewhere.
Like the Mormons, they call them elders at 21 or something.
Nowhere. They don't have the requisite knowledge.
Yeah.
They have the requisite knowledge in order to answer people's questions, right? Basic questions. But you're stunting their spiritual growth. That's what's happening. Now, if someone says, listen, I have to do this because, I want to be in this field, and I need to make money and whatever, that person has to have, in order to be successful, in order to grow in learning, you have to learn yourself, right? One thing I can tell you over the years of whatever I was doing, whatever I was doing, when I was in the States, I was involved in real estate, when I came back here as well, different things. At the end of the day, I had a certain amount of time to learn, right? In the morning, I told people you can't get me before 12 o'clock, right? Before like 11:30, 12 o'clock. I'd start learning about 8:30 for like 3 hours when I came back to Israel. some people started to make fun of, oh, you're outside of Israel. Like, what'd you learn? I said, oh, I finished this tractate, finished that tractate. I'm in the middle of this other tractate. That's the most important thing. That's where you grow, right? Giving these classes, I could do blindfolded some of them, right? Not saying anything about myself, but the knowledge is there, right? But if you don't grow yourself, you're not learning other things, you're not, challenging yourself as well, you just do it on autopilot. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be successful. Right? It doesn't mean that. And someone, one of my rabbis told me, he said, well, you got guts. You got a lot of guts going out there. People can ask you all kinds of things. You're right. People can ask me all kinds of things. And most times I'm going to have an answer.
Yeah.
Right? You want to know why? It's not because I'm such a rabbinic scholar. I'll tell you why. When I used to learn, many years ago, I used to learn full day. So when I used to walk 15 minutes, to get to where I used to learn, 15 minutes back, how do most people know me? With headphones. Right? Headphones and a Walkman. Walkman doesn't exist anymore, even though I have 2 of them in my house. And I'm still working on finishing up my tapes. I got one more box, I think, to go. But how do people know me? Because I listen to all these tapes. But what did I listen to? I listened to all kinds of tapes on Jewish outreach, philosophical questions, great rabbis, spoke about all kinds of things. I had more than 1,500 tapes in my library before I had a fire. I lost a whole bunch of them. But I got probably more than 1,000, tapes that I'm still, like I said, working on, putting them up, making them to MP3s. But that's, besides learning, going through books of Jewish philosophy, right, and going through Jewish law and having that connection with my Rebbe, with all that, I listen to all these tapes, right? I read a whole bunch of books. I got 500 books in my house in English. A lot of them on outreach, Jewish philosophy, Jewish law, biographies, all kinds of things, right? So, in that event, as someone said, well, the rabbi of mine said, well, you got guts doing it. Okay, it's not like, first of all, I haven't asked the question. Not like I haven't heard other people ask the question. And these are not like all the questions no one's ever heard of, right? They're all the same questions for the last 2,000 years, etc. So, yeah, you read the book Derech Hashem, that answered a lot of questions, right? A tremendous amount of questions. Right? Went through other things, helped me answer a lot of questions. That combined with learning, listen to other great rabbis on tape, on video, MP3s, and all that. That's where the knowledge came from. Right now, are there other things I don't know? Plenty. Right? Plenty of things. Right? But there are things that I've heard so many times in different ways. Ask the question this way, ask the question that way.
Hopefully
answer like this, answer like that. It's not like someone's coming out of left field and asking something I never heard of. Now, there is a difference. Noahides a whole different beast. What they're obligated in, what they're not obligated in, it's a lot more complicated. Right? It's certainly a lot more complicated. That being said, someone comes with a question. Right? Now, if I don't have an answer, I have people who to go to. Right? I go to my Rebbe, he'll give me an answer in 30 seconds. Right? Probably less. Right? If I'm able to scream in his ear and he can hear. Right? I'll get a pretty quick answer. Other people I can go to as well. But some of these questions are extremely deep. So it take more than, 5 seconds to give an answer. But at the same time, people deserve an answer. They deserve clarity in an answer. And, not everything has a clear answer either. Right? Some things, you talk about the end of days, you talk about the next world, there are a lot of different opinions. Right? Tomorrow, I'm going to be speaking my conversion class on 13 principles of faith. The last 2 principles, what are the last 2 principles of the Rambam's 13 principles of faith? They are the coming of the Messiah and resurrection of the dead. Right? So these are questions everybody has. Right? Especially non-Jews coming out of Christianity. They want to know what's going to be with the end of days. They want to know what the Messiah is going to do. Right? Or what he's supposed to do. They want to know about resurrection. Who gets up? Who doesn't get up? They want to know when does this period, when is it? Does the Messiah come first? Then there's Olam Haba, then there's next world, and then the world gets destroyed, and then after the world gets destroyed, there's resurrection, or maybe there's resurrection, and the world it's a whole discussion. It's a whole discussion, right? I will throw out one question. The question is, they ask in the Rambam, why didn't the Rambam speak about Olam Haba? What does the Rambam speak about? He speaks about the coming of the Messiah. And he speaks about what? He speaks about, what do I say? Resurrection. Resurrection of the dead. Now, the obvious question would be, if he's talking about these two things, don't we understand this Olam Haba? There's a next world. Where does that fit? Where does that fit in the equation? Right? So the simple answer is, when you look at the Messianic era in Olam Haba, or really resurrection of the dead, they're all thrown in together. The only question is, which comes first? Everyone agrees the Messianic era we're in now. We're waiting for the Messiah to come. Right? After the Messiah comes, then there's a whole question. Is it Olam Haba? All the souls waiting in the spiritual world, going to come back, and they're going to come back in some body, or is it really going to be, they're still going to wait there, and then we're going to wait for resurrection, right? The world will get destroyed, there'll be resurrection. There's a whole question what the order is. Mm-hmm. But since each one is really dependent on the other, the Rambam didn't need to mention it, right? He didn't need to mention it, but this is something esoteric. As my Rebbe would say, I've never met anyone who's been in that world and come back. So you ask me, okay, what's the answer? You know what the answer is? Nobody knows. The Rambam says clear that in order to try and figure out when the end of days is going to be, when this war of Gog and Magog, when the Messiah is going to come, you go through all the verses in Tanakh, right? Guess what? There's a contradiction across the board. There's a contradiction between Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Isaiah and Hosea and Zechariah. And there are verses that we can't get clear. Why not? Because there are other verses that contradict. Right? So someone will say, so okay, what's the answer? 25. What do you mean? What do you mean, what's the answer? We don't know. Right? And the Rambam says it's forbidden to try and figure it out. Why? Because if we try and figure it out, you make a mistake and say, see, totally not true. Since it's not true, I'm going to throw off the yoke of heaven. No more yoke of heaven. Don't pass go. Don't collect 200. It's over. So the Rambam says, don't waste your time. Right? But by former Christians drive them bad. Because this is the thing they live.
Dispensationalists.
If I would only speak about this in all my classes, everyone would love it. But guess what? I don't. It's all about other things. Blessings, kashrus, other things. In picayune detail. That's all true, right? That's all very true. At the end of the day, there's something's interesting, right? It's interesting to them because they've been brainwashed their whole life about all this stuff, and now they want to know what the Torah says, and they come to see it's a whole big contradiction. It's something that is hidden within hiddenness. Nobody knows, right? There's one person in every generation that knows, and he knows that he knows, and he gives it over before he dies to someone else, in case the Messiah is not going to come in that generation, and that's it. Right? No, we can speculate. We can think it's going to happen this way, that way, whatever, and this year, that year.
Yes, yeah.
We can speculate. You know what they say? The ones who know aren't talking. The ones who don't know, they're the ones flapping their gums. Right? They can say, maybe it's like this, maybe it's like that. Everyone agrees. We're living in the Messianic era. I don't think there's any question. Right? But at the end of the day, nobody knows when. So, these are questions, and I get questions a lot, and I'm not saying they're not legitimate questions. There are people who ask questions that have no relevance to their lives. None.
Or to the lesson you're teaching.
But they're burning questions, which I do understand. And, someone will say, well, like, what should I focus on? Well, you want to be a Jew, the focus is going to be on Jewish law. Right? Blessings, kashrus, Shabbos, festivals. These are things you got to know. I'm not saying you can't read books on Jewish philosophy. Plenty of great books out there, right? Reading biography of great rabbis. Plenty of them. Go to artscroll.com. You blow your brains out. Plenty of them, right? Very inspirational. Okay. Right? Do I concentrate? Do I just read those? No. That's extracurricular. I put on my reading list, Path of the Just. It's, by the Ramchal, the classic
Beautiful
book.
Work,
Do you need to read it to convert? No. It's not part of the conversion process, but it's a good book to read. Derech Hashem, people say, what, you're going to recommend non-Jews to read it? Yeah. Even though most Jews don't read it because it's the basics about life. It's the basics about why we have an evil inclination, and how the evil inclination works. And reincarnation, spiritual forces and how they work. Right? I did that class for Noahide Nations. Anyone interested, I can give a plug for that. I gave 33 classes, 66 hours. It's a mind-boggling book, right? Absolutely mind-boggling book. Changed my life. I would have understood this years and years ago. If I would have heard about it, it would have changed my life, right? Instantaneously, right? But obviously it wasn't meant to be till later. But, these are basic things every Jew has to know. Now, you can tell me the book is steeped in Kabbalah. True. I didn't give over Kabbalah aspects of it, right? But I went through it so people understand what it means, basically. They understand what it means and how the world works. It's a game changer, right? You've learned it. It's a game changer, right? Even without my class, you got something out of it. Yeah. I don't know how, but you still got something out of it.
It gives us a sense of order.
It's a deep book. It's a very, very deep book. But
I love the Ramchal's
the point with all this is that even though it's good to know, right? Am I obligated if I'm in the process of conversion to go through it? No, I'm not obligated. Right, but if you want to know how the world works, you better find the time to learn a lot of this stuff, right? A lot about Jewish philosophy. This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing by Ethics of Our Fathers, right? We're going back and understanding. These rabbis understood something. They understood the psyche of man, right? They understood a lot more than anyone will ever give them credit for, right? In general, and why do I say that? Because you're going to look at this Mishnah, right? Or any other mission, you'll say, hey, someone who's a boor can't be fearful of sin. Someone who's bashful can't learn. Impatient people cannot teach. Now, someone's going to say, isn't that obvious? Aren't some of these things obvious? They're not teaching you necessarily things you don't know, right? They are teaching, novel ideas. That is true. In the Ramchal's path of the just.
They're massaging the mind for sure.
In the Ramchal's path of the just in his introduction, which I have on my subscription website. I went through the whole book. In his introduction, what does he say? He says that I'm not teaching you anything you don't already know. I'm teaching you things you already know. You just might have forgotten. It's a refresher, right? You get a few chapters in, you realize you're not holding by any of it. But he's telling you things you already know, right? So here, you'll say, why are they teaching me things I already know? So we have spent 12 episodes. It's going to be the 12th and it's going to be a 13th also, right? In a couple of weeks. We're showing that it's not so simple, right? We're showing that there's more than meets the eye, right? So we mentioned, back to our case here, right? We mentioned that, a teacher shows a student a sour face, right? They're never going to ask questions. The Talmud tells us in Tractate Ta'anit 8a tells us if we see a student that is learning, it's hard for them, right? It's hard for them like iron, right? Something very hard, right? Anyone come in contact with iron recently, right? Something extremely hard. Then why is it? Because his teacher doesn't know how to explain it properly. Oh. In other words, you might say, well, maybe it's a blockhead. Maybe, he just doesn't get it. Maybe his mind's wandering. Maybe, he's got ADHD. Maybe he watches too much of the CFL. I don't know. He's got all these problems, whatever they may be. See, okay, that was one. I got a few more, right? So he says.
Season starts in a month.
Over here, his teacher doesn't know how to explain it properly. Now, what does that mean in the vernacular? That means that if someone wants to teach and the students don't understand what they're teaching, then it's clear as day the teacher himself or herself does not understand what they're teaching. I'm not saying it's about Kabbalah, it's high lofty ideals, this and that. It's something they don't have absolute clarity themselves. If they don't have clarity themselves, they can't give it over. They won't be able to give it over.
And that's
right? It doesn't necessarily mean someone may ask a question, they may not be sure on the answer, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about where they just have no clarity at all, right? If they don't have any clarity at all, it's not on the students, right? Probably 95% of the time, I would say it's not on the student. The Talmud here says, doesn't need me to argue. The Talmud here says it's on the teacher, right? It has nothing to do with the student here. The student is okay, right? The fact that the teacher doesn't give it over in the way he should or the way she should, it means that's why the student has no clarity. Question.
When I first did Pirkei Avos, reading it the way the rabbi I was doing the class with explained what he used the phrase bilateral affinity. There has to be that bilateral affinity between the teacher and the student for it to grip. And he tried to give an explanation of what when it was transmitted all the way back to the beginning, that Moses gave it over to Joshua to the elders, and the elders, the prophets, and so on. There has to be that bilateral affinity where each one has the same affinity for what's being discussed, and it's got to be across the boards in order to truly transmit.
Right, and the other thing we made clear as well, which we've spoken about a number of times, is the fact that each person has to have their own Rebbe, right? They have to have their own mentor. And we mentioned way back when that the Mishnah says you have to make for yourself a rabbi, a mentor. Right? The commentaries there say, some of them say, even if it costs you money. Right? Because if you want to know and you want to understand, you may have to, take money out of your pocket, in order to get there.
Do it, though.
But the point is, you need somebody to teach you. Talmud is not something, even as a non-Jew, it has nothing to do with IQ. That has nothing to do with language, because Talmud's been translated, right? It's been English, French, Spanish, even in Korean, because Koreans think that, Jews are much smarter, must be because of Talmud study. You get all these Koreans learning Talmud now. But you can't learn it without someone who knows how to learn, right? It has, again, it has nothing to do with IQ. A person could have an unbelievable IQ, but there's language that's different. There are insinuations that are different. There's hierarchy in how we, poskin, how we go according to Jewish law. There are many things that in order for a person to know and to understand, you have to have someone teach you. If you don't have someone teach you, then, you see what people do. You see what, certainly what Christians do, what Messianics do. They'll quote, the Talmud says this, the Talmud says that. They quote one line and totally misrepresent it. Right? Now, there are things, if you go back to my videos on Tanakh Talk, there are things we spoke about oral law that make us look bad. Say things against non-Jews, but you have to understand the context. 99% of it is context. And then they'll say, this context is apologetics, this and that. Okay. Somebody like that, you'll never convince, right? But in the end, if you understand what's behind it, what the context is, then it's understandable. If you pick and choose, which a lot of people do, they totally take it out of context. Okay, right? But that's exactly what they want to do.
Hear the whole of the matter.
And they have an agenda to make us look bad, right? So I do understand that. But make no mistake, no one's going to be a rabbinic scholar learning on their own. Never going to happen. Right? I know a Jew many years ago. I've been in contact for many, many years. But he told me when he learns Tanakh, when he learns the prophets, the writing, I don't learn it with any commentary. Now, I thought this was strange way back when. I said, how can you not learn it with commentary? Right? In other words, there are plenty of things in Tanakh, many, many things, that we don't understand at all. At all. Because if you look at it at face value, you look at Isaiah, you look at Ezekiel, you look at the other prophets, etc. There, sometimes chapter by chapter, they're talking about different things, right? They're not, they go from one thing to another, and if you're not paying attention, you miss, you miss what they're talking about. So, and that's why it is funny. You see Christians a lot misinterpret.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever, and they cherry pick what they want to say. Oh, it's about JC, it's about this, about that, about the other things, but it's all in context. Right? A lot of it's in context. Like, well, you tell me that, that's Rashi's opinion, that's his one's opinion. Well, we don't know the moral law. Well, that's why you're going to make a lot of mistakes. Right? That's why, again, a lot of people, when they get older, do not learn Tanakh for this reason. Right? Kids learn it, they learn it very quickly, learn about the stories, different things. But the older person gets, they don't learn it so much. Why don't they learn it so much? Because a lot of things contradict, right? There are a lot of things, or seemingly look like contradictions, that are very hard to understand, right? And there are a lot of things, even in general, that are hard to understand at face value, even when we understand what the verses say, right? Some of the stories don't make any sense logically based on other knowledge, right? It's very, very rich, in that sense. But if you don't have the proper perspective, then what's going to happen? It can turn you into a heretic, right? Very much turn you into a heretic. There's a joke, the Abarbanel, right? More than 500 years ago, has a major commentary on Chumash, right, on 5 books and on Tanakh, right? So the joke is when he starts his commentary on whatever parsha it is, he's got like 10 to 15 questions, and then he goes step by step to answer the questions. Problem is, someone's learning, let's say Friday night, let's say during the winter, it's a long Friday night, you fall asleep in the middle, but you never get to the answer, right? You hear 15 questions, 15 very strong questions, but you don't get the answer, right? That's how you become a heretic. Because you never hear the answer. Questions are always better than the answer anyway, right? But you don't hear the answer. What happens, right? You got to hear the answer, right? But when it comes to Tanakh in general, a lot of it is a lot. There's a lot of hiddenness there, right?
For a reason, too.
There's knowledge. Person has to have, in Talmud, what the Talmud describes it, etc. Commentaries describes a lot going on, right? There's a lot going on. So for non-Jews coming out of Christianity, or within Christianity, think, oh, we're gonna tell you what it means. We're gonna tell it based on our knowledge, based on what the Christians say, etc. Well, they're coming out of left field. They're totally coming out of left field. But the irony of all ironies, just while I'm on my soapbox for a second, the irony of all ironies is they'll quote the most difficult passages to interpret. Yeah. And then come up with their own understanding. If it's something that's basic, they come up with a crazy thing. It's one thing. But they don't just ask basic things, on basic stories or whatever. Right? What are they gonna? They're gonna ask on the prophet Daniel. They're gonna ask on the prophet Isaiah, right? Something that make no sense.
Yeah,
that makes no sense that they quote, and they turn it into a pretzel to come up with the right understanding. Okay, for us it's hard enough, to go through to understand. For someone coming out of left field, and I see someone who's a what do you call them? Not New Hebrews. What do you call them? Hebrew
roots.
I forget what they call Hebrew roots. Someone who's big into Hebrew roots, and they're talking about contradictions with this, contradictions with that, and this must mean about JC and inherent thing. They're out to lunch, right? They're out to lunch because, first of all, obviously they have an agenda, but second of all, they're turning the Torah into a pretzel and telling things. First of all, misinterpreting what it says, right? Certainly misinterpreting what the translation is because they can't read Hebrew, right? So you got the King James version, which is full of problems, right? But then trying to turn it into a pretzel and show, oh no, this can't mean this, and this is about JC because it means like this, and they turn the whole thing upside down. And you're looking at it, it's like, but that's not what it means.
Yeah, like Malcolm X.
I remember, like, I had this question. I was building up this whole question, and that's one of my rabbis about, it says like this, Rashi says like this, and I got like this, and I was like bringing this whole thing, and he said, that's beautiful. There's only one problem. I said, what's the problem? He goes, that's not what the word means.
Yeah.
I was like,
don't add up.
I was like, what do you mean that's not what the word means? He goes, that's not what the word means. This is what the word means. And I was like, so one of my rabbis once told me, he said, don't worry, you still get credit for learning Torah. That's also part of Torah, even though it's a mistranslation, right? You mistranslated it, so they nipped it in the bud and said that's not what it means, because you're going to go down the wrong path. So they do it all the time, right? They do it all the time. So what's the point? My point over here is that the teacher has to be able to explain it properly. But not only do they have to explain it properly, you have to have someone teach you. Right? This person I'm thinking of in the Hebrew roots, they don't have their own teacher. Right? They're their own teacher. They're their own expert.
Yeah.
Right? They're
follow their own belly.
They're an absolute lunatic. Because if you know how to read between what they say, and you understand what the text says itself.
Yeah, it's only make believe. I think how Conway Twitty put it.
That they're a little bit loony, right? But the point is that they don't have a teacher. If you don't have someone to teach you, then how can it be you think you understand what you're talking about? I don't care if you know the Bible from cover to cover, right? Someone once told me I started I give a class in the book of Leviticus chapter 14 every Sunday, 9 o'clock Eastern time, 4 o'clock Israel time. I once started from the book of Genesis, and work my way through. It's been, more than 10 years going through this. So someone said, what do I need your classes for? I've gone through the Bible, cover to cover many times. I know, many times, backwards and forwards. I said, really? So he said, yeah. I said, well, there's a story, in Genesis speaks about the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Right? And what happens right after the destruction of the Sodom and Gomorrah? Right? The Lot, right, is with his two daughters. Because two daughters think everyone got destroyed. There's no one else alive. They got their father drunk. So what happens? They have relations with the father. Incest. They have two children. They have two boys. The first one is named Moab. Right? Why Moab? Right? We'll just stick with this one. Why Moab? Me'av. From my father. We'll say she didn't grow up in Victorian England. Right? Not the most righteous of women. Now, who comes out of Moab? Who comes out of the king of Moab? Right? Daughter, granddaughter, no question to the pedigree here. Ruth comes out of Moab. And who comes out of Ruth 4 or 5 generations later? King David. Right? So for the Christians, and certainly for us, it's crucial that, David comes from Ruth. Ruth's a convert, right? Obviously. But she comes from Moab. So I said to this person, I understand you probably know this story backwards and forwards. But it's probably pretty strange that the future Messiah that has to come from the lineage of David comes from an incestuous relationship through Ruth. And Ruth comes through Moab. I said, I bet you never thought of that. So I said, let me tell you another story. You got the story of Judah and Tamar. Right? Judah has 2 sons. They both die. Puts away his 3rd son. Doesn't want him to die. So what happens? One day he's taking the sheep out, and someone tells Tamar, your father-in-law's coming. She dresses up as a prostitute, and the whole story, he's with her, and she doesn't embarrass him and all that. In any case, she has 2 children through him. She has twins. Through those twins, we understand his kingship. Kingship. Yaakov gives the blessing to Yehuda, and that kingship never leaves the tribe of Judah, right? The tribe of Yehuda. So I said to this person, I bet you never thought that kingship would come from that type of relationship. Because after the Torah was given, a father-in-law is not allowed to be with the daughter-in-law. At this point, it was still permitted, right? Seemingly, it's permitted over here. Regardless, even if you tell me it's forbidden, this is what God wanted. This is where kingship comes from that relationship. So I said, I bet you never would have thought in a million years kingship is going to come through this relationship, right? So the person came back to me and said, Rabbi, what's your point? I said, my point is, I don't think you know the Bible from cover to cover as well as you think you do. There's a lot.
Head's a little swollen.
When you look at the book of Genesis in general, and you look at the stories, a lot of things at face value make absolutely no sense. They make no sense at all. We just finished the book of Numbers. Many things don't make sense at face value. The story of the spies. You got the story of Korah. You got the story of the people complaining. We want fish. We missed the fish in Auschwitz. We missed the watermelon. You got the story of Pinchas, Bilam. A lot of things at face value make no sense. So if you're a Karaite, you're reading these stories, you go out of your mind. Right? You'd have to go out of your mind because you have to make heads or tails out of it. So the thing is, the Karaites have their own interpretation. Oh, they have their own oral law, wherever they get it from. Right? But it begs for interpretation over here. So someone to say, yeah, I know the Bible from cover to cover. I understand it. You don't understand anything. Right? There's very little you can understand because 80% of what the Torah tells me makes no sense. Why doesn't it make any sense? Because the Torah doesn't give me any detail. Torah we mentioned earlier. See, you never know the connection between the beginning and the end. The Torah tells me you have an obligation to sit in the sukkah. Parashas Emor, book of Leviticus, chapter 24 or 23. Right? I think chapter 23 speaks about sitting in a sukkah. Any definition of a sukkah? Nope. Says you have to bring this palm frond, this nice smelling fruit, lemon on steroids. right, in my language, a citron, an esrog, with what? With willows, with myrtle leaves. Now, and it says you have to bring it in front of God. That's beautiful. Where? When? What?
How? Yeah.
Tell me. I got no definition. Torah tells me I'm not allowed to kill. You're right. What about euthanasia? Is that murder? No, that's different. That's mercy. What if, someone wants to kill me? The only way I can stop them is by killing them. Am I liable? Torah doesn't answer me, right? Torah begs for oral law. Torah begs for an explanation over here.
Clearly,
so when
yes.
you look at these verses, you have to look at commentary. Because the Torah said, I'll give another example. Torah tells me 10 commandments, don't steal. What's it talking about? You can say, of course, I'm not allowed to steal from you. You're not allowed to steal from me, right? Isn't that what it means? But I got many other verses later on. The Torah's going to tell me, don't steal. Oh, if the Torah tells me, no, don't steal, and I get all these other verses, unless they're telling me something else or giving me other information, the Torah can't tell me it's one of the 10 commandments, don't steal. Maybe, right? And, I learned relatively late in life that command of don't steal means don't kidnap. It doesn't mean don't steal money. It means do not kidnap. You're not allowed to kidnap, and obviously ransom the person, etc. Right? How do we know that? At face value, I wouldn't say that. I'd say it doesn't, means don't steal. Maybe
theft.
It means you don't hold someone up, right? Maybe it doesn't mean you steal Granny's purse. You beat her up and you steal her purse and you run away, right? Or maybe it means you take money from someone in hiding. In other words, they don't, they may find out the money's missing. They don't know who took it, right? Maybe it's talking about that. Maybe it's talking about both. What's it talking about? Gee, I don't know. I'm not sure. Well, if you're not sure, let me ask you, where are you going to get the information from? Who's going to give you that information? Right? That information has to be taught to you. Right? Or, you have to learn it. Right? And there were many things when I became religious. I started learning Chumash, at night for 20 minutes, half an hour, started just going through material and through the commentators. It was unbelievable. Unbelievable, because verses at face value, like you thought maybe, you understood what they meant, think again, right? You didn't have a clue what it meant, because there's a lot more going on behind the scenes.
The mark, yeah.
I've given 39 classes, I think 39, right? I'll have to double check, on the book of Leviticus chapter 14, right? It's either 38 or 49, right? It's very, very easy for me to check here. Right, whatever it is, it's talking about that chapter. It's talking about Saras, right? Totally talking about, chapter 39. I'm giving 39 classes. Tomorrow will be 40, right? So it's talking about Saras. What is Saras? Saras is this disease that a person got if they spoke Lashon Hara, right? Or if they were miserly, or if they were haughty, or whatever. They get spots on their body, get spots on their clothing, spots on their house. What was the only way to get rid of it? Repentance. It wasn't something that was natural, meaning that the only way to get rid of it, you had to be thrown outside the camp. The Kohen's going to come a week later, right? He's going to see if you still have the spots. So you have to be introspective. God's going to read your thoughts. He's going to read your heart. If a person truly repented the way they need to, very good. Spots go away, right? He goes back to his house. Everything's good. If not, he goes back. But it doesn't really matter. You take antibiotics, you take skin creams, you do acupuncture, you do a little bit of voodoo. I don't know. You do all these things. None of them are going to help. They're Ramban. Others say the same thing, because it's not something that's natural, right? It's something that is above nature, and it's caused by something spiritual. Why is it caused by something spiritual? You spoke Lashon Hara, spoke badly against someone else, you were haughty, whatever the case is. It's a negative character trait, right? So the only way to get rid of it is true repentance. How is it true repentance? God's going to see in your heart. That's why you're sent outside the camp. You're outside the camp of God. You're outside the camp of the Levites, outside the camp of the Israelites. You're all the way out, right? You're in the boondocks. You're living in the prairies, right? You're stuck in the middle of nowhere. Right? No internet, no TV, no CFL, nothing. Contemplation. Contemplation. That's what you're there for. You're there to think about what you did. Once you thought about what you did and you feel bad, you understand who God is, you understand what's going on in the world, you understand what your soul is, what your purpose in this world is, then you can truly repent. And once you truly repent, God looks into your heart and he says, okay, very good. You got the message. I'm going to take it away. You go back to society, right? I've given 39 classes. Now I've talked about a lot of other different topics, right? Other different topics have come out, right? But the point is, what did I call it? I called it Deeper Insights to Saras. Now, it's not only about Saras, it's about life and it's about other things, as well. But we do speak about, the nitty gritty, what happens when the house gets hit, etc. So, we do talk about the nitty gritty, of why a person got the spot, why, let's say, last number of weeks, been speaking about the house got hit, right? But the house got hit is a chapter later than when the body got hit, than when the clothing got hit, right? So really, it goes out of order, right? Because if you're going to tell me God wants you to repent, what's he going to do? He's not going to hit you in the body directly, right? That's not what's going to happen. He'll hit you outside the body. He'll hit you around you. He'll hit your house, right? Then once he hits your house, you don't get the message, which we're going to speak about more tomorrow. He's going to hit your clothing. That's a little bit closer, right? If you don't get the message when it hits your clothing, then he hits the body, right? But there's an obvious question. You can't learn Chumash like you're reading a newspaper, right? In other words, you got to think. If all the problems and all the discussion about Saras, right, about the spiritual manifestation of a physical thing, right? If that's all talking about in the previous chapter, so what happened over here? Why is it out of order? Why is the most lenient thing spoken about last? It should have been before, not my question. Right, but Rashi says many times in Chumash, Rashi says, the Torah told me out of order. So you don't have to worry. Like let's say about the sin of the golden calf. Happened shortly after the giving of the Torah Mount Sinai. Right, but it's like 5, 6, 7 chapters later. So you say, what happened? So Rashi says, Moshe wrote it down, but he didn't necessarily write it down in chronological order. Doesn't mean it's not true. He just didn't write it down in chronological order. So what does that mean? So Rashi says the fundamental principle. He says, Ein mukdam u'mucha b'Torah. There's no beginning and after in the Torah, meaning it's not in order. It's not in chronological order. Now, if it's not in chronological order, what's the obvious question? Then the man's going to ask, put it on the Roku channel, get people to think over here. They're going to say, why is it out of order over here? Right? Why is it chapters later? Right? We got at the end of the book of Exodus. I'll just quote this because people say I never quote anything. Right? In chapter 35, I think. Yeah, chapter 35, Parshas Vayakil, second to last Torah portion in the book of Exodus. We're talking about in chapters before, about the building of the tabernacle, right? And all the loops and the bars and the boards and the clasp, all these different things, right? The Torah tells me in chapter 35, actually I spoke about this last week in Tanakh, talking about the laws of the Sabbath. The Torah tells me, chapter 35, verse 1, Moshe assembled the entire assembly of the children of Israel, and he says to them, these are things God commanded you to do, right? Verse 2, 6 days work shall be done, 7 days shall be holy for you, complete rest for Hashem, whoever does work on it shall be put to death, i.e. the laws of the Sabbath, right? Now, the next verse 3, I'll just quote it, not kindle a fire, don't kindle a fire, any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day. But before that, right, chapter 18 says I'm not allowed to carry, says I'm not allowed to cook, right? Now, if in the 10 Commandments it also tells me you got an obligation to keep the Sabbath day for Jews, obviously not for non-Jews, right? The question's going to be, what's this verse doing here? What in the world is this verse doing here? I got chapters talking about the building of the Mishkan, for goodness sakes. We take out our book. There are a number of books been written just about the Mishkan, about the tabernacle, and how it looked, and the loops, and the clasp, and all this. If I got chapter and chapter speaking about that, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes along God, and he says, He says to Moshe, get all the community together. I want you to get everyone together because I'm going to tell you something. What am I going to tell you? The laws of Shabbos. So what does Rashi say on the spot? I don't get it. What's it doing here? It makes no sense in my language, or as I would say, a lot of sense it doesn't make. So what's it doing here? So you can say, well, maybe what it's doing here is Rashi, the Torah just threw it in, right? It's out of order. Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi understood that there's a juxtaposition of verses. Because there's a juxtaposition of verses, it tells me anything that was done in the Mishkan, anything done in the tabernacle, can't do on Shabbos. These are the 39 categories we learn out, right? But Rashi and others ask the question, it's out of order. What's it doing here? Not my question, right? But it's an obvious question. If again, when we learn Chumash, you got to learn it critically. You can't just read it like you're reading a newspaper. You got to think what's going on. Why is it telling me this? Why is it in this order? Because if there are a juxtaposition of verses, a lot of things don't necessarily make sense, right? The commentaries have to sometimes turn themselves into a pretzel in order to understand it. Because the Karaite, they're going to be stuck. Karaite's going to say, wow, that's a great question. The Karaite's going to say, the Torah tells me 3 times, do not cook a calf in its mother's milk, right? We understand you're not allowed to eat milk and meat together. That's great. Why does it tell me 3 times? So maybe for some knucklehead, in the prairie, he's going to say, I don't get it. So he's going to tell you 3 times, right? No offense to anyone who's hosting this show or looks like the host of this show, right? I'm digressing here. Point is, you're going to say, why does it tell me 3 times? If you're a Karaite, why does it tell me 3 times? Dee. Come on, Final Jeopardy. What's the answer? I know the answer because I have oral law. Oral law tells me what the answer is. But if you're a Karaite, you got to make up your own oral law over here because the Torah is never going to repeat anything for no reason. Right now, if it repeats it 3 times, it's going to tell me the same thing? Come on, unless I have a 25 IQ or I'm a knucklehead or whatever, right? Then I get a problem here. I get a major problem. So the commentator is going to have to explain why, right? But so what's the whole point? I got totally off topic here, right? But that's normal. So what's the point over here? The point is, if you're learning Chumash or you're learning anything else, you got to, first of all, you got to think about what it says, right? Then you're going to ask questions, right? A person's probably going to ask questions, right? If you have other knowledge, you ask questions. What's going on here? I know something else from somewhere else. So if I know something else from somewhere else, so why is the question here? Right? Why is this verse here? Right? That was the question we asked before. Right? Or there are other things going on, right, that I may not be aware of. Right? And if I'm not aware of, right, them, then I got to ask the question. Right? But at the same time, anything that we learn, we're not going to take at face value. You got to think. Right? You got to think about what's being said. You got to think about what is behind, what's being said. Some things may be more obvious, right? Some things less obvious, so to speak. So, even if it's obvious, the Torah didn't necessarily have to tell me. But why does the Torah tell me, even if it's obvious? Because it's probably not as obvious as you think. Because people will say, come on, it's very easy. In the no-hide laws, we'll just mention what we're ending up here, right? In the no-hide laws, don't I understand one of the no-hide laws is don't kill, right? That's obvious, right? Of course that's obvious. What about an animal? Am I allowed to kill an animal? Well, of course. Why would I say of course? Forget all the PETA activists, I'm allowed to eat them, right? If they're kosher animals, right? I'm allowed to use them in scientific experimentation, right? In order to cure diseases, right? Am I allowed to kill a wasp? Am I allowed to kill a bee? For someone, if a bee stings them, they could kill them. You're allowed to kill a bee, even on Shabbos. You don't have to worry about trapping them, right? What about killing someone who's in hospice? Am I allowed to do that? If they're on a respirator, you'll say that's mercy. What about somebody breaks into my house? Am I allowed to kill them? What if, I'm allowed to kill them if they're in my house? The Torah says. Why? Because they know you're going to forfeit. You're going to fight against them. They're going to fight against you. You have a right to kill them. But what if they're running out of your house now? I have my shotgun. I shoot them. Can I shoot them? Difference of opinion in the Jerusalem Talmud. Why? Because if they're already running out of the house, they got 2 feet out of the house. And now I'm about ready to shoot them. They're in point blank range. Am I allowed to shoot them?
You're no longer in
right?
jeopardy.
The Torah says they have to be in your house. If they're not in my house, I can't shoot them. I can run after them. I can try and get them, but I'm not allowed to kill them. There are 2 opinions, right? One opinion says I'm allowed to, one says I'm not allowed to. But if I take the Torah at face value, I shouldn't be allowed to at all, right? Now, you're going to tell me this means that the Noahide laws are a lot more complicated. You're right. They're a heck of a lot more complicated. That's why you have to learn from someone competent, right, who can teach, which gets us into the original thing altogether, what we're speaking about here, because I'm not totally off topic, and that is if you want to learn, you got to learn by someone who's qualified. And the person who's qualified better be able to give over information in order that people understand. There's some people that know a heck of a lot, but they don't know how to teach. They don't know how to give over, right? So people like that shouldn't teach, right? They shouldn't teach, because if they're going to confuse people and they're not going to give them what they need, then there's no point, right? Not everyone is made to be a teacher, right? You know, that is very true, right? So that's what we said before, that, you know, you have to make it well known to them. You have to give it over in the language that they understand. You don't want to talk to them way over their head. And if it's hard for them to learn, that what we just said, if it's hard to learn for them like iron, like steel, then why are they not understanding? They're not understanding because the teacher's not teaching them properly. He's not explaining it. In order for someone to want to explain to others, to want to give over to others, it has to be clear to them. If it's not clear to them, they won't be able to teach it, right? That is a fundamental, you know, principle in teaching. You know, and I've seen that. I've seen that with others. I've seen it with myself also, right? Certain things that maybe I didn't have, you know, really 100% clear. You know, when someone asked a question, I saw that what I said wasn't clear, right? Something, let's say, that I thought was obvious. And obviously people didn't think it was so obvious. And, you know, I sort of stepped over a few things and I had to go back. You know, okay, that was my bad. I should have made it clear. Right? But if someone doesn't know and someone doesn't understand, you know, then they're not going to be able to give over. You know, they're not going to be give over in a certain way. Now, again, even somebody younger can still give over, right? In the story of Rabbi Yaron Ruvain, right? And his rabbis told him, teach whatever you know, right? Whatever you know. You know, so again, you know, that I do hear what that's about. You know, doing outreach, whatever you know. But, you know, as my Rebbe said, you know, you could do that, you know, and you know, you can do that, but he said you want to be more seasoned. He said his point was, if you want to teach the masses, you want to go out and start your own community and do that, you got to have more knowledge. Yeah, it doesn't mean you won't be successful this way, right? It doesn't mean that. But if you have more knowledge and you have a broader level of knowledge, that's a whole different thing.
It's a different level,
right?
Yeah.
You know, and today the problem is, I'll just, you know, end with this because we're over. You know, the problem is there are people that focus on like one thing. You know, like they'll know one thing like an expert. Okay. I'm not saying that's not worth nothing.
A specialist.
But there are a lot of people out there that only know certain things, but in broader knowledge of Torah, they don't have. Right? And you need more people that have broader knowledge of Torah. Even if they're not experts in every aspect, okay. Right? But if they don't have a broader knowledge in Torah, they only have one aspect, you know, you're lacking something over here. I'm not saying we don't need experts.
Is dangerous.
We definitely need experts, but you need people that have broader knowledge also, you know, that can bridge a lot of gaps for people that need it. That's the because you're gonna say, Rabbi, what's the message for today? That's the message, right? You need people that know how to teach, be able to give it over properly, but you need people also that have a broader level of knowledge, you know, that can answer people's harder questions and questions about life. Now, if you don't know, you go to people who know, but there are plenty of books out there, you know, in our language that we can read, that we can understand. You got to think, you know, even if a person gets an answer, you have to know how to give it over to someone else as well, you know, and that's, you know, and one of the things I've been gifted with, and that's not my own, that's God's given it to me, is be able to take very, very difficult things and bring it down to this world. And that's not something I'm trained in. You know, when it comes to teaching in general, you know, when I started teaching in my early 20s, etc. People said, "Where'd you learn how to teach? You give over great." I said, "You guys are my guinea pigs." I don't have any pedagogy
Sounding boards,
things.
yeah.
Certain things I still have to learn. There's no question. But you say, "Well, you were a natural." Yeah, what does it mean to be a natural? You thank the man above, because he's the one that gave it. It's not based on my own ability. And I'm only very good at embellishing what other great people say. Very rarely will I say things on my own. And I make clear when I say things on my own. But in the end, it's because I listen to others. And I incorporated what other people say, but it's not just one person, right? There's a lot of different people that help clarify certain things, different aspects of the same thing, in order to be able to give the answers I've been able to give over the years. So we're gonna call that a wrap.
Right on, right on. Well, Hashem knows the lessons you need in your life and when they'll be delivered. I mean, how many times in your life, Rabbi, have you gone over something and then 10 years later it clicks through some order of circumstance,
I'll
situation?
tell you one story. When I went to yeshiva for the first time,
right,
and I was learning the month of Elul, being introspective, learning the laws of the Rambam of the laws of repentance. And we came up to people you're not allowed to learn Torah from, different types of heretics. That was it. I couldn't go back to where I was studying. But when I got to yeshiva, it answered so many different questions that I had. Not just the Rambam's, laws of repentance, but so many other things. I wish I would have learned it when I was younger, much younger. Because then different difficult things I went through, and I'm still, going through. Now it's a lot easier, in different ways. But if I would have had that knowledge way back when, it would have saved me a lot of anguish, a lot of heartache. But then, once I saw certain things, the whole, it was like I was missing, 972, pieces of a 1,000-piece puzzle. And now all of a sudden, all the pieces went think. It's like Pac-Man. You try to get to another end, and you're like, oh, I got to eat my life force here to be able to eat them, whatever, right? But it answered everything like that. Did it make me righteous overnight? No. But it put things in such different perspective. I got to the conclusion either the rest of the world is cracked and I have to see a shrink, which still may be the case, right? Or there's just another way to look at things. And when I got to yeshiva and I got to real Torah, what I call the real deal, when I got to that, it was a whole different world. A whole different world, and thank God I was brainwashed for the good. Right? And, I got my brain squeegeed. So that is tremendous. There's a lot of things I had to crow about and different things, but okay. But, but in the end, the perspective was such a refreshing thing that when I looked at the world after that, it was a whole different thing. And thank God I got there. Thank God, I learned what I needed to learn, and, I moved on. Plenty of room to grow. There's no question. But having that type of knowledge at that point just opened all kinds of doors. And finally, I got to the point where I needed to get to, and it was unbelievable.
Exciting. I can relate to what you're saying. Thank you so much, Rabbi. Beautiful, beautiful lesson today. So useful, but I got to shut it down to get ready for Rabbi Poston. We're doing the 48 Ways to Wisdom in his Beyond the Seven series. Excellent course. So your student, Sandra Thorgren, there has got a couple of comments or questions there at the end of the YouTube chat, Rabbi. If you have some time, you may want to get back to her on those. Yeah. So,
okay. Yeah, I see the question about things out of order, right? There are a lot of things, right? Just to answer quickly, there are a lot of things that, we see in the Torah out of order that you have to see. There is juxtaposition, right? Rashi brings it out. Others bring it out. There are reasons why. It's not just like, well, Rashi says it's out of order and it's out of order. But the question is why, right? Sometimes Torah takes a break and then goes back and tells a story or tells us something else. There are reasons, not just haphazard. Right, definitely not haphazard, but again, Chumash, like anything else, you got to sit on it. You got to see. You got to see what the commentaries see and how they learn it. It's not just a haphazard thing. There is a method to the madness, so to speak.
Like an orchestra crescendo, there's a reason it's
right,
in there.
Right. Yeah. And again, you have to see why, and you have to see what it means. But a lot of times like that, definitely.
All right, we're 10 minutes after our time, so I've got to shut her down for today. So we're off for next week. Hashem willing, are we on in 2 more weeks?
2 more weeks. We are definitely going to be on. We are next week
Back
is
with
the
Pirkei
fast
Avos
of
in
the
2
ninth
more
of Av.
weeks.
So you're not really allowed to learn Torah anyway. At least not this type of Torah, but Torah that speaks about the the destruction of the temple and feeling like a piece of dirt. So it would be kind of sacrilege to do it. So yeah, we're not going to do it next week. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, we should be back to normal. And there will be, as I said, the prophet returns, even though there's no prophecy. As I said, there will be a part 13. Right? I'm not sure there'll be a part 14, but I guarantee there'll be a part 13.
Well, I'm sure you always have what to say, and we do appreciate it. Folks, you can always find Rabbi Coffman's material, orthodoxconversion.com, or you can find his find him on Facebook or
Beyond Orthodox conversion to Judaism.
Yeah, there you go. Or his YouTube
Now, we've been doing
page.
75 shows. You didn't get it right yet.
Yeah, we're right around 75 right now.
We'll see you on the Roku channel, buddy.
All right, I got to shut it down. Okay, folks, have a wonderful, wonderful week. We're not going to be back with Pirkei Avos for at least 2 weeks, not next week, but the week after. But we are going live on the Roku station. Now, I do need some feedback, because my rabbi's, pushing me to actually be doing live broadcasts onto Roku directly, and I can, but I cannot do both YouTube and Roku at the same time. If you folks, love, joining on YouTube, please, I would have to then upload later rather than broadcasting on. So if you guys would rather see this class go live on Roku on the International Noahide television station, or would you rather me keep it here on YouTube? Please let me know, and I'll discuss it with the rabbi, and of course we'll follow his lead. I appreciate everything you have to share. So we're going to sign out for now, folks. Have a wonderful, wonderful week.